Good evening, my friends. Come on in. Grab a drink and a bite to eat. Settle in now, for tonight I have quite the tale to tell. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. In the last video, I shared with you a short horror story of my own making. A story of a serial killer, his descent into madness and delusion, and of the women who wrote to him during his imprisonment. Now, let us move on to one of my true tales. Tonight's story takes place when my granny was still young, having not yet met my papa and moved to his neck of the woods. She was told this tale by a member of the church that she and her parents would attend. I call it A Passenger Most Divine. Joe was a trucker. By the end of his career, he had spent more than 30 years on the road and had been to every state in the continental U.S., plus Alaska. A man like that has seen and forgotten more than many of us have ever witnessed. Included among those experiences were some very disturbing ones. The one he relayed to my granny was the only one he never could truly explain. At the time of this story, he was on a very long haul and was far out in the country, traveling some very winding roads quite a ways out from civilization. To make matters worse, he had noticed that his brakes had been acting a little off during his last couple of trips. Normally, he would have had the chance to get his rig looked at between runs, but he had put it off. The first time, one of the other drivers was sick, so Joe was asked to take on the load so the kid could go home and rest. He had run rigs for a long time and figured he could make the haul before things got too bad. By the end of that run, his brakes were doing quite a bit of squeaking, but Joe didn't have the chance to get them looked at when he returned to the transport center. The only replacement rigs were in the shop already. To make matters worse, there was a mix-up in delivery schedules, and the only one close enough to make it to the destination on time was Joe. So off Joe went again. By the time he was about 20 miles out from his destination, he had noticed that he was having to push the pedals harder and harder to get them to stop. That in itself was troubling enough, but the main problem that lay between him and his destination was a huge mountain. One that Joe didn't know if he could make it up. With him being so close to his destination and so far out from anything else, Joe felt he had no choice but to try to push through it. So, Joe revved up and started climbing the mountain. The closer he got to the top, though, the more worried he became. Joe had traveled the same route hundreds of times before and knew exactly what lay waiting for him. On the other side of the mountain was a steep decline, a slope far sharper than the one his rig was currently snaking its way up. This slope was particularly bad at times, so bad that the road department had carved out several runaway ramps for trucks to shoot up if they lost control. But those slopes came with one caveat. You had to be able to maneuver your vehicle safely over to them, trailers and all, first. And even if you did make it to one, you still had to get down the mountain somehow. When Joe first headed out, he really thought his truck was going to be alright long enough to get to the next spot. But with as hot and heavy as he had to run it, he started to wonder if the brake pads had crystallized. He was hauling multiple trailers, so if his brakes did go and he had to hit one of the runoff slopes, would he be able to get up onto it? If he got too close to the edge of one, and one of his trailers didn't quite make it on, the whole rig would come crashing down the side of the mountain. And if he couldn't make it to one of the slopes, there was still a very long way down. As Joe got closer and closer to the summit, he started praying. "Lord, if you can hear me, please get me to the bottom of this mountain in one piece." All the way up, Joe prayed. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the highway disappeared behind him. Soon, the very peak of the mountain was in sight. Joe's heart was in his throat. Then, just as Joe crested the hill, he got the shock of his life as his passenger door came open. He only had a moment to look at the door before he headed over the mountaintop, but before he could move to close it, the door shut, and he felt the rush of air and a warm presence as if someone had sat down beside him. Instantly, he felt something almost speak in his mind. It's going to be all right. Joe started down the mountain. It was hard going. Joe heard his brakes squalling not long into the decline. Further down, he found he had to punch his brakes almost to the floor to get them to work. Within moments, the smell of burning rubber filled his nostrils, and then smoke. As he worked hard to keep the vehicle from veering too far toward the cliffside of the mountain, the first runaway ramp came into view. "Keep going," the voice in his mind said. "You'll make it." Down the truck plunged. One runaway ramp became another, and then another, and then Joe could no longer notice the rest. The other slopes, the trees, the highway beneath his truck, it all disappeared into a blurry mess rushing past. He gritted his teeth, his hands and forehead now slicking with sweat, as he focused on the road ahead of him. His truck was getting closer to the bottom, where he could see the road was empty besides his own rig. He moved to the middle of the road, holding it as steady as he could so it wouldn't veer too far away. The smell of smoke got stronger. He just knew his brakes had finally caught fire. He kept going. A glance at the speedometer told him all he needed to know. 20 miles per hour. 25 miles per hour. 35. 45. 50 miles per hour. The brakes were screaming at this point. The smell of smoke and burning rubber were so strong that he could taste them, and Joe had to take quicker, shorter breaths to keep the acrid smell out of his nostrils so he could concentrate. A loud pop rang out and he swore. Now a tire had come loose. Would the rest of his truck tear apart in this mad rush too? Closer. 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 Joe didn't know who was screaming louder at this point, him or his truck. But the moment he hit the bottom and started sailing out onto the wide expanse of highway, Joe was absolutely roaring from victory. He managed to coast the vehicle to a stop after a short time, pulling off to the side of the road to check on his brakes. As he bent down to grab his fire extinguisher, the passenger door opened, and he felt the presence leave. He was actually in shock for a moment as he watched the door close again. But finally, he smiled and nodded a thank you to whomever or whatever had been in the truck with him. Then he got out. After that, Joe had no more problems on his way to his destination, and he refused to go back out on the road for any other company in an unsafe vehicle for the next 25 years or so that he was on the road until he retired. And while he never again had any unexplained passengers, sometimes he had a feeling that there was something nearby, watching over him. And there you have it, folks. Did you enjoy this story? I'm certain the truckers among you are probably wanting to pull their hair out from hearing this one. To you, I say thank you. You're the ones who spend your time out there bringing us food and everything else, while losing time out with your families. You got a dangerous job that I could never do, and you have my utmost respect for that. For my other listeners, Do your trucker friends a kindness and buy 'em a burger while you're out sometime. Good food's hard to come by out there on that cold, lonely road, and you never know if that trip they're on could be their last. Good night. Please like this video, subscribe, and share it with all your friends. And hit the notification bell too, so you can catch your next, latest spooky fix as soon as I upload it. And see you all real soon.